Nel będzie pochwalony Jezus Chrystus. All of you who have raised children or been involved in the care of children have sometimes heard a child say, "But you promised. Mom, you promised. Dad, you said we would do this." And there's not only impatience and perhaps sorrow, there's a sense of betrayal that those whom the children counted on to be secure in their commitment to them seemed unable or unwilling to follow through on a promise. The prophet Isaiah was raised up by God to bring words of encouragement and comfort to a people who were saying, "God, you promised to bring us salvation. You promised to establish us in our own land. You promised to keep your covenant forever." And he had. To the people of the first covenant, the chosen people, the Jewish people. And here they were, in exile, in a foreign land, the Davidic kingdom in ruins, unable to celebrate the liturgy of the Lord in his temple, exiled in such a way that they began to ask, what happened to the promise that was made to Abraham and his wife Sarah and their posterity through Isaac and Jacob and their descendants? What happened to that promise to David that his kingdom would last forever? God, you promised. And here we are. All is lost. And the prophet Isaiah came to bring words of comfort by promising again that the promises would be fulfilled and that they should watch for signs. And Isaiah told them, this is what will happen when the kingdom will come, when salvation will be at hand. Those who are blind will see, their eyes will be opened. Those who are deaf, who cannot hear, will have their ears unclogged. Those who are lame will leap like stags, like deer. Those who cannot speak will have their tongues loosened, set free so that they can proclaim the glories of the Lord, and the land itself will flourish. There will be water in the desert, and we will come home. St. Mark, in hearing the stories of Jesus' own ministry, and in listening to those who knew him, recognized in the actions of Jesus, even before he was raised from the dead, that here the promises were being fulfilled. Because what did Jesus do? He opened eyes. He unclogged ears. He cured the lame. He even brought the dead back to life, so that the people would flourish, and they would know that God's kingdom, the presence of God, now not just in the law, but in Jesus himself, would last forever. And yet, Jesus wasn't doing it right. The miracle that is a sign that the promises are to be fulfilled was a cure not of a Jew, but of a Gentile. Someone from the northern part of the Holy Land where Jesus preached. Someone who in a sense was your ancestor and mine. Someone from the nations, not from the chosen nation, the chosen people. What was going wrong? It was as if you had planned a huge party, a family reunion, to celebrate a great event, and your mother invited a pile of strangers. What is going on? We were going to get together and talk about our family. We were going to be at peace with one another. We were going to enjoy good food and be totally relaxed because we knew everyone. And she brings in all these strangers. So we can't be ourselves the way we wanted to be. God acts in strange ways. The promises are fulfilled. But Jesus said, not just to the Jews, but to the Gentiles, to all the nations. He was not just to be their king. He was to be Savior of the entire human race. And they had to live with that. And some did and some didn't. And we have to live with that. And some do and some don't. Because we can betray the promises, even now. St. James, in his epistle, tells us that our faith must work itself out in action, and even those who accept the promises, and even those who accept the promises of God fulfilled in Jesus, even in the first generation in the Apostolic Church, some people got it wrong. And they were separating people out, whether they were rich or whether they were poor. Maybe they were of a different race or a different language, whatever it was. Even in the first generation of the church, there were people who betrayed the promises, whose welcome was less than that of the Lord, who loves everyone without exception. And so we look at the 75 years of belief, of faith that God has fulfilled the promises in Jesus, that is celebrated today in your parish church. If we could bring people back 100 years ago, 75 years ago, who started this parish, they might look around and say, what are all these people doing here? This isn't how we thought it was going to work. They might look around and see a few changes and say, we don't recognize that. Because the miracles of the Lord tell us that along with our faith, we have to keep our eyes open, keep our ears unclogged, keep our mouth ready to speak the truth, that God continues to unfold until Christ returns in glory. This parish is a work in progress, and we give thanks today for the magnificent work, for all those whom St. James would say are co-workers with the Lord in fulfilling the promises, as you are, and as were those who came before you here, and those who will come after. We thank God for the power and the strength to work so that the promises are made visible, so that our faith is strong. And even as we do that, and we thank God, we thank also so many others with the recognition that betrayal is always possible. And we must constantly pray, not only to believe, but to believe in such a way that Christ's own mission will be as welcoming, as inclusive, as abundant, as fruitful as Christ wants it to be. Conscious of the fact that we can stop that from happening. And so we thank God. And we thank also God's co-workers in these 75 years. Father Alexis Gorski, who 75 years ago gave so much of his life for so many years to create this marvelous parish of St. Bruno's. And those who followed him as your pastors until today, Father Joseph Bremner, to whom I'm extraordinarily grateful, not only because he is your pastor, but because he is a marvelous priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago. He serves on the priest placement board. He serves in many ways to reach out to all kinds of people beyond the confines of this parish. You should be proud of him. We are all proud of him because he is a man who believes the promises and recognizing the generosity of God is generous in turn. His predecessor, Father Edmund Schwanga, who is here with us, was the same kind of pastor, as you know. And those who associated themselves with them, the priests who are here now, Father Stasharczyk, I'm sorry I don't get that right, I'm still learning Polish, Father Burin, Father Shemiga, the resident, and along with them, so many others, the Felician sisters, who have been so faithful to this parish, and to so many other parishes that are rooted in the Polish community in the Archdiocese, who have shaped countless